The Veil wasn't the sort of place you took a casual stroll through the cosmos. It was more of a back alley sort of route, the kind you only use when you've got nowhere else to go or you're up to something dodgy. The kind of place where you could get mugged by a star cluster if you weren't paying attention, an interplanetary highway with all the charm of a wet sock. Commander Rylus Gage sat in the command chair of the Resolute, a ship held together more by spite than by any engineering genius. He had a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite by someone in a rush, all sharp angles and a permanent scowl that could cut glass. Anything on the scanners yet, Xenia? Or are we still in the cosmic dead zone? Xenia Voss, the ship's pilot, smirked as she tapped at the screens with casual disdain. If sarcasm was a sport, she'd be an Olympian. Nothing but the usual space junk, Commander, unless you count that as a threat now. Don't tempt me, Rylus muttered, casting a wary glance at the endless expanse outside. We've got enough problems without the universe throwing more crap our way. The Resolute had seen better days. Hell, it had seen better decades. The paint was peeling, the hull was dented, and the engines occasionally made a noise that could only be described as concerning. But it was home, if you were generous with the term. Kelder, how's that engine looking? Rylus barked into the comm, his voice carrying the weight of a man used to things going wrong. Kelder Finn's voice crackled back, sounding like it was filtered through a bucket of gravel. Oh, you know, Commander, it's doing that thing again where it pretends it's a blender. Well, tell it we're not making smoothies, Rylus replied dryly. Just keep it going until we hit the next safe zone. Kelder chuckled, a sound like rusty gears grinding together. Aye, though if it blows up at least it'll be a quick death, could be worse. Always looking on the bright side, aren't you? Xenia quipped, her fingers dancing over her controls. Commander, I'm picking up something weird ahead. Rylus leaned forward, his interest piqued. Define weird. Unusual energy signatures. Alien, maybe. Definitely not one of Ior's, Xenia said, her tone shifting from teasing to serious in a heartbeat. Alien. Well, that's just peachy, Rylus muttered, rubbing a hand over his stubbled jaw. Looks like the universe finally decided to throw us a curveball. The crew of the Resolute wasn't exactly known for their love of alien encounters. Mostly because encounters with aliens usually ended with something exploding, someone getting shot, or both. And they weren't keen on any of those options. All right, people, you know the drill, Rylus said, his voice steady. Xenia, keep us pointed away from anything that looks like trouble. Kelder, keep the engines from doing anything stupid. Kelder snorted. I'll try my best, but no promises. They have a mind of their own, I swear. Great. We're relying on a sentient blender. Just what I always wanted, Rylus said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. As the Resolute cruised through the Veil, the alien signals grew stronger, like some cosmic lighthouse guiding them towards inevitable doom. Rylus had a feeling this was going to go about as well as a lead balloon in a zero-G soccer match. Incoming message, Commander, Xenia announced, her voice tinged with curiosity. It's automated, I think. Play it, Rylus ordered, leaning back in his chair with the air of a man expecting bad news. The message crackled through the speakers, a guttural language peppered with sharp clicks and whistles. Identify, it demanded in a voice as cold as the void. Friendly bunch, Kelder observed dryly. Guess they're not big on small talk. Identify yourselves, the message repeated, more insistently this time. Rylus rolled his eyes. All right, let's try not to antagonize them more than absolutely necessary. Xenia, send back our ID codes and try not to sound too human. Xenia nodded, fingers flying over her console. Sending now. And there it goes. Let's hope they're not allergic to friendliness. The response was almost immediate, another burst of alien speech, but this time there was a note of curiosity, if not outright aggression. Human vessel, state your purpose in this sector. Looking for a good place to retire, Rylus muttered under his breath before Xenia shot him a look. Exploration and trade, he replied more diplomatically. The silence stretched out, thick with tension, before the next message came through. Do not deviate from your current course. Any deviation will be considered hostile. Well, that's not ominous at all, Zynia said, shaking her head. Looks like we're on their radar now. Great, Rylus said, giving a sarcastic thumbs up no one could see. Nothing like being babysat by mysterious aliens with itchy trigger fingers. Commander, should we prep the weapons? Kelder asked, his tone a mix of excitement and trepidation. Not yet, Rylus replied. Let's not give them a reason to blow us out of the sky just yet. The Resolute continued its uneasy journey through the veil, every creak and groan of the ship's ancient frame amplified in the tense silence. Rylus watched the sensors, half expecting the alien ships to swoop in with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Commander, Zynia said suddenly, her eyes fixed on the screen. I think we've got company. Rylus leaned forward, squinting at the display. How many? At least 3, she replied, her voice tight. And they're not small either. Perfect, Rylus muttered, the sarcasm in his voice palpable. Just what we needed. The alien ships appeared on the screen, sleek and deadly, like a trio of sharks circling their prey. Rylus took a deep breath, trying to ignore the way his heart was pounding like a drum in his chest. Okay, people, let's not screw this up, he said, his voice steady despite the anxiety gnawing at his gut. Zynia, keep us on course. Kelder, get ready to divert power to shields if they start getting twitchy. Zynia nodded, her hands steady on the controls. Got it, Commander. The alien ships held their formation, escorting the Resolute through the sector like an unwanted chaperone. Rylus could almost feel the animosity radiating from them, a silent promise of violence if they so much as sneezed in the wrong direction. Message incoming, Zynia said, her voice cutting through the tension. They're inviting us to dock. Well, isn't that nice of them, Kelder said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. A welcoming committee. More like a firing squad, Rylus replied, though he couldn't help but grin at Kelder's gallows humor. Still, it's probably better than being turned into space debris. Probably, Zynia agreed, her tone mirroring his nervous optimism. The Resolute followed the alien ships, approaching a massive station that loomed in the distance like a sleeping giant. It was an architectural nightmare, all jagged edges and glowing lights, a monument to alien efficiency, or a lack thereof. Looks cozy, Rylus remarked as they neared the docking bay. Let's hope they've got decent coffee, Zynia snorted, or at least something that'll keep us awake. As the Resolute docked, the crew exchanged uneasy glances. Rylus stood, stretching out the kinks in his back with a wince. All right, let's go make some new friends, or enemies, Kelder added helpfully. Same thing, really, Zynia said with a shrug. The airlock door hissed open and Rylus led the way, trying to look more confident than he felt. The alien station was even more imposing up close, a labyrinth of metal and shadow that seemed to go on forever. So, Zynia said, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous hall. What's the plan, Commander? Rylus shrugged. Same plan as always, try not to get killed. They walked in silence, the weight of unknown eyes watching their every move. Rylus felt a shiver run down his spine but brushed it off with a bravado he didn't quite feel. Welcome. A voice suddenly echoed through the hall, deep and resonant. Rylus stopped, instinct screaming at him to be ready for anything. The speaker stepped into view, tall, with skin that shimmered like oil on water, eyes that glowed with an inner light. I am Drell, representative of the Council, the alien said, voice smooth as silk and just as trustworthy. Nice to meet you, Rylus replied, his tone carefully neutral. I'm Commander Rylus Gage. This is Zynia Voss, our pilot, and Kelder Finn, our engineer. We are curious about your presence here, Drell continued, ignoring the introductions. Few dare travel the veil. We like to live dangerously, Rylus said with a smirk. Keeps things interesting. Drell regarded them with an inscrutable expression. Interesting indeed, we have much to discuss. Rylus exchanged a glance with Zynia and Kelder. The kind of glance that said, this is going to be a long day. As Drell led them deeper into the station, Rylus couldn't shake the feeling they just walked into a trap. But then, when did they ever get out of these situations without a few bruises? With grim determination, he followed, ready to face whatever unexpected challenge humanity had gotten itself into this time. As the Resolute docked with the alien station, it became abundantly clear to Rylus that they were about as welcome here as a fart in an airlock. Drell's eyes, or the glowing orbs that passed for them, watched their every move with the kind of scrutiny that suggested they were potential lab rats rather than guests. "So, what's the deal here, Drell?" Rylus asked, feigning casual interest while his mind raced with possible escape routes. "You got a gift shop, or is this just a look-don't-touch kind of tour?" Drell's lips, or what seemed to be the approximation of them, curved slightly upwards in an unsettling mockery of a smile. "Your presence intrigues us, Commander Gage. Few humans venture here, fewer still leave." "Yeah, well, we thought we'd see what all the fuss was about," Rylus replied, matching Drell's unsettling smile with his own brand of irreverence. "But if you're planning to keep us here, I should warn you, we didn't pack our pajamas." Kelder, ever the beacon of optimism, muttered under his breath, "I knew I should have brought my lucky wrench." Xenia was the one to roll her eyes this time. "Right, because a wrench is exactly what we need to negotiate with aliens." As they were led deeper into the labyrinthine hallways, Rylus couldn't help but notice the glaring lack of anything that remotely resembled a friendly face. A few curious glances from behind shadowed alcoves, but mostly just cold, impersonal metal and the occasional flicker of alien tech that hummed with a life of its own. "Anyone else getting the distinct impression we're walking into a trap?" Rylus asked, trying to lighten the mood with a touch of gallows humor. "Only since we stepped off the ship," Xenia replied dryly. "But hey, at least it's not boring." Drell finally stopped at a wide set of doors that hissed open with a sound like a dying snake. The room beyond was vast, dominated by a table that looked suspiciously like an operating table. Rylus fought the urge to make a break for it. "Please sit," Drell said, gesturing to the chairs, if those cold metal contraptions could be called that, lining the room. "Do we get a last meal?" Kelder quipped, eyeing the setup with a mix of curiosity and dread. "Your sense of humor is." "Noted," Drell said, his tone as ambiguous as ever. Rylus took a seat, trying to ignore the way the metal bit into his back like a disapproving mother-in-law. "So, you wanted to talk. Let's talk." Drell leaned forward, looming over the table like a judge about to pass a particularly unpleasant sentence. "We are fascinated by humans' propensity for survival. Your methods are unconventional." "Unconventional is a polite way of saying batshit crazy," Xenia interjected, earning a snort from Kelder. "Different strokes," Rylus acknowledged with a shrug. "But I have a feeling you're not just here to compliment our survival skills." Drell's expression, or lack thereof, remained unchanged. "Your tactics against the Syndicate were effective, yet illogical by our standards." "Ah, the Syndicate." "A charming group of thugs and pirates who thought they owned this patch of space. Rylus had a few run-ins with them before, and he'd never been much of a fan." "We like to keep things unpredictable," Rylus said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "Keeps the bad guys on their toes." Drell nodded slowly. "Indeed, we wish to understand, perhaps learn." "Learn what?" Kelder asked, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "Adaptation," Drell replied simply. Rylus exchanged a glance with Xenia. This was turning into one hell of an intergalactic TED talk. "We're happy to trade tips, but let's cut to the chase. What's really going on here?" Before Drell could respond, an alarm blared, echoing through the room with all the subtlety of a bullhorn in a library. Drell's expression shifted to something that might have resembled concern if Rylus squinted hard enough. "What the hell is that?" Xenia asked, already on her feet and ready to move. "It seems our discussion is postponed," Drell said, his composure cracking ever so slightly. The doors swung open, and in the hallway beyond, alien soldiers scrambled past, weapons at the ready. Rylus didn't need to understand their language to know panic when he saw it. "Time to go," Rylus said, his instincts kicking into high gear. Drell hesitated, looking like he was weighing options that were all equally bad. "You should return to your ship, quickly." "Now there's an idea I can get behind," Kelder said, already heading for the exit with surprising speed. They raced back through the corridors, the air thick with tension and the sound of distant explosions. The alien station was under attack, and Rylus didn't plan on sticking around to see how it played out. "Xenia, get us airborne as soon as we're inside," Rylus ordered, his breath coming in gasps as they ran. "On it, Commander," Xenia replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. As they reached the Resolute, Rylus couldn't help but feel a pang of relief. The old ship was an eyesore and a death trap, but it was their eyesore and death trap. Home sweet flying junk heap. They boarded in record time, and Xenia didn't waste a second before taking the helm. The Resolute lurched into motion, groaning like a hungover drunk, but it moved. "We've got company," Kelder announced, checking the sensors. "And they don't look friendly. You couldn't just say they're here to give us flowers and chocolate," Rylus shot back, strapping himself in. "Sorry, my optimistic streak skipped a generation," Kelder replied. Xenia pushed the Resolute to its limits, weaving through the debris and firefight with a skill that would have made an artist proud. The alien ships were on their tail, firing with the kind of eagerness that suggested they had a grudge against the human race. "Shields up, Kelder," Rylus shouted, holding on for dear life as the ship rocked violently. "I'm working on it," Kelder barked, his hands a blur over the controls. "We're running on duct tape and hope here." One of the alien ships got too close, and Xenia took the opportunity to spin the Resolute in a maneuver that should have been impossible for a ship of its size. The alien pilot clearly hadn't read the manual on crazy human tactics and overshot, careening off into space. "That's one down," Xenia said, a rare note of satisfaction in her voice. "Only a dozen more to go," Rylus replied, more to keep his team focused than out of any real hope of survival. As they dodged and weaved, the Resolute took hit after hit. The alarm screamed in protest, and Rylus wondered if this was the end of the line. But then something miraculous happened. The alien ships hesitated. It was barely noticeable at first, but their formation wavered, their fire slackened. Rylus knew confusion when he saw it, and he wasn't about to let an opportunity go to waste. "Xenia, get us out of here," he yelled, holding onto his seat as if it could somehow shield him from the chaos. "I'm on it, Commander," Xenia replied through gritted teeth, her focus absolute. With a final burst of speed, the Resolute broke free, leaving the confused alien fleet in its wake. Rylus didn't dare breathe until the ship was clear of the immediate danger. "Well, that was a fun little stroll," Kelder said, slumping back in his seat, his face a mask of exhaustion and relief. "Next time, let's try somewhere less hostile," Xenia suggested, her fingers still dancing over the controls as she guided them to a safe distance. "Agreed," Rylus said, wiping sweat from his brow. "But what the hell was that all about?" "Probably just a misunderstanding," Kelder offered with a shrug. "Or they really hate our taste in music." Rylus chuckled, though he knew there was more to it. "Whatever it was, we're not sticking around to find out." As they settled into a quieter region of space, Rylus allowed himself a moment to relax. But of course, peace was a fleeting luxury. Xenia's voice cut through his musings like a hot knife through butter. "Commander, we've got something weird in the cargo bay." "Define weird," Rylus said, feeling a sense of déjà vu creeping up on him. "It's a device," Xenia replied, her brow furrowed as she stared at the readouts. "Alien tech, and it was left behind during our little escapade." "Great," Rylus muttered. "Just what we needed, an alien trinket." Kelder leaned over to get a look, his curiosity piqued despite the fatigue. "You think it's dangerous?" "Probably," Rylus replied. "But when has that ever stopped us?" They made their way to the cargo bay, the air filled with the scent of fried circuits and burnt metal. The device sat in the center of the bay, an ominous presence that seemed to hum with an energy all its own. "So," Kelder said, eyeing the device with both suspicion and fascination, "what do we do with it?" Rylus scratched his chin, the beginnings of a plan forming in his mind. "We figure out what it is, see if it can help us, or at least not blow us up." "And if it can't?" Xenia asked, crossing her arms. Then we throw it out the nearest airlock and hope it doesn't follow us home, Rylus replied with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. It was a mystery, wrapped in danger and served with a side of potential doom. But for the crew of the Resolute, it was just another Tuesday. Rylus Gage stared at the alien device sitting in the cargo bay like it was a ticking time bomb, or worse, a surprise tax audit. It was a mess of shifting lights and circuits, all humming with a kind of menace that suggested it was either about to give them the answers to the universe or blow them to kingdom come. So, what do we call this thing? The Box of Doom, Pandora's Piñata, Zynia quipped, her eyes glued to the display as if daring it to make the first move. How about mysterious pain in the ass? Kelder grumbled, his trusty wrench tucked into his belt like a gunslinger ready for a showdown. I'm telling you, I don't like the way it's looking at us. Relax, it's just a machine, Rylus said, though the truth was, it made his skin crawl too. But we need to figure out what it's doing here, before it decides to redecorate the ship. Kelder knelt by the device, tapping it cautiously, like someone poking a hibernating bear with a stick. Feels like it's got some kind of AI running, the kind that probably hates humanity more than your average morning traffic. Zynia leaned closer, her fingers dancing over her datapad, trying to make sense of the readout. Looks like someone tried to copy our strategic algorithms, badly. It's like trying to clone a steak with a celery stick, Rylus snorted. So, the aliens were trying to get inside our heads and ended up giving themselves a migraine instead. Seems like it, Kelder said, his gravelly voice tinged with grim satisfaction. Our tactics might not be logical, but they work. And for these aliens, that's as comprehensible as quantum calculus to a chimp. So their big plan was to outsmart us by thinking like us, Zynia asked, shaking her head. Bit of a backfire if you ask me. Before Rylus could respond, the ship's lights flickered ominously, as if the Resolute itself was weighing in on the conversation, or just throwing a tantrum. That's not good, Kelder muttered, his voice dropping like a stone in a pond. This isn't just bad wiring, something's messing with the systems. Must be our little friend here, Rylus said, glaring at the device. Zynia, can you isolate it? Already on it, Commander, she replied, fingers a blur on the control panel. But it's like trying to untangle a nest of angry snakes. One wrong move and we'll have the whole ship throwing a fit, Rylus sighed, rubbing his temples. Great. Not only do we have an alien artifact that's smarter than it looks, but it's also sabotaging our ride home. Kelder kicked the device lightly, probably more out of frustration than any real hope of fixing the problem. I swear, one of these days I'm gonna find an alien device that doesn't want to kill us. Don't hold your breath, Rylus said dryly. But if you do, make sure to let me know. It'll be a historic event. The ship systems continued their temperamental dance, flickering lights, buzzing panels, and the occasional alarming clatter from the depths of the engine room. It wasn't long before the smell of something burning wafted through the corridors, Kelder's usual cologne of mechanical panic. Whatever it's doing, it's getting worse, Kelder warned, his hands now a flurry of motion as he worked to keep the systems from falling apart. Any chance we can shut it down? Zynia asked, already knowing the answer but hoping for a miracle. Kelder shook his head. We pull the plug and it might take the whole ship with it, like yanking a tooth by going through the skull. Right? So we're stuck with a homicidal toaster, Rylus muttered. Let's hope the rest of the universe is having a bad day too. The Resolute shuddered, a reminder that the universe rarely cared about their hopes. Rylus braced himself as the ship settled into an uneasy rhythm, the alarms fading but never truly silent. At least the alien fleet's taking their sweet time, Zynia noted, checking the scanners. Though something tells me they're not just waiting to offer us a handshake. They'll regroup, Rylus said, his voice a low growl. And when they do, we better be ready. Ready with what? Kelder asked, not even bothering to keep the sarcasm out of his voice. Bubblegum and prayer. We're short on both. I've got my lucky wrench, Kelder added, waving it in the air like a talisman. If that doesn't work, we might want to start practicing our best we come in peace speeches. Rylus chuckled despite himself. If that fails, I've got a backup plan. Running. Now that's a strategy I can get behind, Zynia said, though the humor in her voice was undercut by the tension in her shoulders. As if on cue, the alien device emitted a low hum, its lights flickering ominously. Rylus had seen that look before, usually in the eyes of someone who just realized their drink was laced with laxatives. "All right," Rylus said, clapping his hands together like a coach rallying a disheartened team. "Let's see if we can turn this thing to our advantage." "What, use it as a doorstop?" Kelder asked, his face a study in dubious skepticism. "More like a bargaining chip," Rylus replied. "If this thing is as valuable as it seems, maybe we can convince the aliens to call off their dogs in exchange." "And if they don't?" Zynia asked, arched brow perfectly framing the skepticism written on her face. "Then we keep running and hope they get bored," Rylus said, the grin on his face only half forced. "That's not much of a plan," Kelder observed, though there was a hint of admiration in his voice for the sheer audacity of it. "Since when have we ever had a good plan?" Rylus shot back, earning an appreciative snort from Zynia. They spent the next few hours trying to make sense of the alien device, a task that quickly devolved into a mixture of educated guesses and good old-fashioned trial and error. The device, for its part, remained as inscrutable as ever, a high-tech enigma wrapped in a mystery and served with a side of existential dread. "Maybe we should just ask it nicely to stop," Kelder suggested, his voice dripping with irony. "You know, appeal to its better nature." "If it has one," Zynia countered, eyeing the device as if it might sprout legs and make a run for it. "At this point, I'd settle for it just not blowing up in our faces," Rylus said, pinching the bridge of his nose. Just then, a low rumble echoed through the ship, and Rylus's heart sank. It was the kind of sound that normally preceded a very bad day. Moments later, the lights flickered again, and the main console spat out a series of error messages that looked suspiciously like an alien version of "Screw you." "Kelder, what's going on?" Rylus barked, his patience wearing thinner than a politician's promise. "It's the device," Kelder said, turning to face Rylus with a grim expression. "It's trying to interface with our systems, sabotage, plain and simple. Can you stop it?" Zynia asked, her focus intensifying as she scanned the ship's vitals. "Not unless you want to live the rest of your lives as very crispy space debris," Kelder replied. "Then we need a new plan," Rylus said, mind racing as he tried to pull a solution from thin air, or failing that, his rear end. "Isolate it physically." Zynia helped Kelder with the manual shutoff. "I'll see if I can distract it." "Distract it with what?" Kelder asked, clearly doubting that a box of circuits could be entertained by shadow puppets or knock-knock jokes. "I don't know. Maybe I'll read it some poetry," Rylus deadpanned, though the humor in his voice was more resigned than anything else. In the dim light of the cargo bay, the three of them worked in tandem, a well-practiced dance of improvisation and swearing. Zynia and Kelder dove into the guts of the ship, their movements precise but hurried as they tried to sever the device's connection to the Resolute systems. Meanwhile, Rylus did his best to keep the device's attention by activating and deactivating nearby systems. It was a desperate gambit, like trying to distract a tiger with a laser pointer, but it was all they had. Once, twice, thrice, the device seemed to react, its lights pulsing in rhythm with Rylus's haphazard button mashing. For a moment, he even dared to hope they might actually pull this off. "Is it working?" Zynia asked, her voice a breathless mix of hope and disbelief. "Don't know," Rylus grunted, "but it's doing something." "Define something," Kelder said, a hint of urgency creeping into his gravelly tone. "Stalling, maybe," Rylus replied, his focus unwavering as he continued his makeshift distraction. "Or plotting our demise. Hard to tell." Just then, the device emitted a high-pitched whine, its lights flashing in a frantic sequence that suggested it was either on the brink of a breakdown or a breakthrough. "That doesn't sound good," Zynia said, her hands a blur as she worked to isolate the offending tech. "Whatever it is," Kelder added, We've only got a few more seconds to pull this off. Then let's make him count, Rylus said, pouring every ounce of concentration into his task. In the end, it was a toss-up whether they'd succeeded through skill or sheer dumb luck. But when the device finally powered down, its lights going dark with a sullen whimper, the sense of relief that washed over them was palpable. "Is it over?" Zynia asked hesitantly, as if fearing the answer might jinx them. "For now," Rylus replied, sagging against a nearby crate. "But let's not stick around to see if it changes its mind." They made quick work of securing the device, double-checking that it was well and truly disconnected from the ship's systems. The air in the cargo bay was still heavy with tension, but the danger had passed, for the moment at least. As they regrouped on the bridge, Rylus allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. They'd faced down an alien threat and lived to tell the tale, albeit with a few more gray hairs for their trouble. "Guess we showed that thing who's boss," Kelder said, his grin equal parts exhaustion and triumph. "Yeah," Zynia agreed, a hint of pride in her voice. "But next time maybe we should just stick to poker," Rylus chuckled, the sound rough-edged but genuine. "No arguments here, but until then let's keep our eyes open and our wits sharper, because something tells me this isn't over yet." "And when is it ever?" Zynia quipped, flashing a weary but determined smile. Rylus didn't have an answer for that. But as the Resolute sailed on through the vast, indifferent void, he knew one thing for certain. They'd face whatever came next just as they always had, together, and with just enough grit and gallows humor to see them through. "Well, if this isn't a regular festival of fresh hell," Rylus muttered as the latest briefing flickered onto the Resolute's battered holoscreen. A shaky hologram of the alien outpost spun before them, complete with rotating red lines that might as well have read, "Abandon all hope. You enter here." Zynia leaned back in her seat, her boots propped up with the casual defiance of someone who'd long ago flipped the bird to authority. "A raid, huh? Good thing I've always wanted to die on an alien rock." "Think of it as a working holiday," Rylus said dryly. "We go in, grab some intel, and if we're lucky, get out before the locals decide to shower us in laser fire." "Sounds cozy," Kelder grunted, idly twirling a spanner between his fingers. "Maybe they'll throw in a free barbecue." Rylus rubbed at the stubble on his chin, contemplating the hologram. The alien outpost was a fortress of cold steel and soulless efficiency. It was designed like a computer's nightmare, where every part seemed intent on intimidating organic life into submission. "We do this right," Rylus continued. "We find out what they are planning in the Veil, and maybe we keep ahead of it. That or we get a front row seat to the universe's worst light show." "You really know how to sell it," Zynia quipped, a wry grin tugging at the corner of her mouth. "We should start a travel agency." "Focus," Rylus said, his voice lowering with the gravity of the situation. "The aliens, they rely on tech more than instinct. That's our edge. They won't see us coming if we play this smart." "And by smart you mean reckless," Kelder added. "'Cause I've got reckless covered," Rylus snorted. "I was thinking more along the lines of suicidal. But let's not split hairs." The plan, such as it was, involved slipping past the outpost's defenses using the Resolute's regrettably vast arsenal of improvised modifications. A few cloaking tricks that worked half the time, some jerry-rigged scans, and the crew's collective talent for being a pain in the ass. "Ready the ship," Rylus ordered, glancing at both Zynia and Kelder. "We leave in an hour, and if it all goes south," Zynia asked, her voice laced with the kind of fatalism that marked her as a seasoned spacefarer. "Then we improvise," Rylus said, his grin a little too feral for comfort. "Or die trying." "Great options," Kelder muttered, his wrench clanging against the metal floor as he headed toward the engine room. "Just what I signed up for." The journey to the alien outpost was mercifully uneventful if you discounted the ship's usual protests at being asked to do, well, anything. Panels flickered, the hull groaned, and the engines coughed like a smoker on their last pack. Rylus kept his gaze on the stars outside, each one a pinprick reminder of just how vast and uncaring the universe really was. Approaching the outpost, Zynia reported, her fingers dancing across the controls with the ease of long practice. Time to engage the cloak and hope it doesn't short out. Hope's all we've got, Rylus agreed, though his stomach twisted at the thought of how thin a thread they were dangling by. With a flick of a switch, the Resolute vanished from sight, the ship's systems straining against the demands placed on them. Invisible, they slipped into the outpost's orbit, the alien structure looming larger and more imposing as they approached. Now or never, Rylus said, his heart pounding in his chest. Zynia, take us in. The ship crept forward, its presence masked by the cloak, slipping past the outpost's defenses like a shadow in the night. Every second stretched into eternity, a countdown to either success or oblivion. Made it, Zynia exhaled, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Now for the fun part, Rylus said, rising from his seat. Let's grab that intel and get out before they know what hit them. Inside the outpost, the air was sterile and frigid, every surface gleaming with a precise brutality that was unnervingly alien. The crew moved with practiced stealth, their footsteps swallowed by the oppressive silence. Feels like a tomb, Kelder whispered, his voice barely audible in the stillness. Yeah, Rylus agreed, his eyes scanning the corridors for any sign of life or worse. Let's hope it stays that way. They navigated their way through the labyrinthine halls, every twist and turn bringing them closer to their goal. The main data hub was a fortress in its own right, a vault of alien knowledge sealed behind layers of security. Here we are, Zynia murmured, pulling out a datapad to interface with the alien systems. Let's see what these space bastards are up to. The pad screen flickered to life, algorithms dancing like fireflies as it translated data at a dizzying speed. Zynia's brow furrowed as she scanned the readout, her eyes widening at what she found. Well, shit, she breathed, her voice a mix of awe and dread. What is it? Rylus demanded, his pulse quickening at her tone. Looks like they're planning a full-scale invasion of the Veil, Zynia said, her fingers tapping a frantic rhythm on the datapad. And by full-scale, I mean we're talking fleets on fleets, enough to make the Resolute look like a speck of dust. How soon? Rylus asked, a pit forming in his stomach. Days, maybe weeks, Zynia replied, her voice laced with urgency. If we don't do something, the Veil's gonna be a war zone. Great, Kelder grumbled, his cynicism unshaken. We should have brought lawn chairs. Focus, Rylus snapped, though a part of him appreciated Kelder's gallows humor. What else can you find? Zynia continued to sift through the data, her expression growing more serious by the second. Looks like their tech is running the show. AI, automated systems, the works. They're banking on that to win. And that's their weakness, Rylus said, an idea sparking in his mind. They've forgotten about instinct adaptability. If we can exploit that, we might stand a chance. You're talking about taking on an entire fleet, Kelder pointed out, skepticism heavy in his voice. With what exactly? Handshakes and harsh language. With whatever we can muster, Rylus countered, his determination hardening into resolve. We leak this intel, rally whoever's willing to fight, use their over-reliance on tech against them. And hope it doesn't backfire, Zynia added, her voice tinged with a wry smile. Because our track record with plans is just stellar. There's a first time for everything, Rylus said, though he couldn't keep the grim humor out of his voice. Now let's get out of here before they realize they've been robbed blind. The return to the Resolute was a blur of tension and adrenaline, the crew moving with the urgency of those acutely aware of how fragile their safety really was. Every step echoed like a countdown, each breath a promise that they might actually make it out alive. Back on the ship, they wasted no time in disengaging from the cloak and making their escape, the outpost shrinking in the rearview as they sped away. Well, that was fun, Zynia said, her voice a mix of relief and lingering tension. Let's never do it again, seconded, Kelder grunted, slumping into his seat with a weary sigh. I think I've had enough alien hospitality to last me a lifetime. Rylus allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction, though it was tempered by the knowledge of what lay ahead. They'd gained valuable intel, but the fight was far from over. We're not done yet, he said, his voice firm despite the exhaustion tugging at him. "We've got a war to stop, and if we want to come out on top, we'll need every bit of grit and cunning we've got. And maybe a miracle or two," Xenia added, though her tone was more hopeful than cynical. "Miracles cost extra," Kelder joked, though the smile on his face was genuine. "But I'm willing to pay." The crew settled in for the journey back, their minds already racing with thoughts of the battle to come. They'd faced long odds before, but never on this scale. It was a test of everything they were and everything they believed they could be. "Whatever happens," Rylus said, his gaze fixed on the stars ahead, "we face it together." And with enough sarcasm to choke a horse, Xenia quipped, her smile a bright spot in the uncertainty. "Wouldn't have it any other way," Rylus replied, his own smile a mirror of hers. They were in this together, come hell or high space, and with any luck they'd make it out the other side. As the Resolute sailed on through the vast, indifferent void, the crew prepared to meet whatever came next with grit, determination, and a healthy dose of irreverence. Because if they were going down, they'd do it on their own terms, laughing in the face of doom and daring the universe to do its worst. Rylus Gage sat slumped in the pilot's seat of the Resolute, staring into the dim glow of the ship's flickering holoscreen like it might reveal some hidden secret of the universe, or at the very least, a solution to their current predicament. The holoscreen, as per usual, offered nothing but static and a faint hum that sounded vaguely apologetic. He ran a hand through his hair, finding solace in the familiar mess. The lights overhead flickered like they were trying to remind him of something important, like changing the bulbs or finding a miracle. "Morale's in the toilet," Captain Xenia said, sprawling lazily in her own chair, a bandage peeking out from under her sleeve. "And the toilet's backed up," Rylus snorted, massaging his temples. "That bad, huh? Worse," Kelder added, his gravelly voice carrying from where he was half buried in the ship's console, presumably trying to keep the thing from exploding or, worse, singing karaoke. "The ship's held together by duct tape and spite, and I'm betting more on the duct tape. Spite's underrated," Rylus countered, though his smile was thin. "It's kept us alive this long. Spite and a healthy disregard for personal safety," Xenia chimed in, adjusting the bandage on her arm with a wince. "Speaking of which, next time we're making a dramatic escape, can we do it without the hole getting shot bit?" "Wouldn't be the same without it," Rylus replied, though the attempt at levity felt strained. He couldn't shake the weight of the mission looming over them. The intel they'd gathered was a ticking time bomb of a revelation, and they were sitting on ground zero. Xenia grinned, though the edges were frayed with pain. "Well, if you're going to question my life choices, at least buy me dinner first." "Noted," Rylus said, trying to ignore the way his stomach tied itself in knots. The alien fleet was amassing, and here they were, stuck in a flying scrapyard with little more than stubbornness and bravado to their names. Kelder emerged from the console, wiping grease from his hands onto a rag that might once have been white. "And just in case anyone's wondering, we're about 2 engine misfires away from blowing ourselves to the next galaxy." Optimism. "I like it," Xenia said, though the attempt at humor didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maybe we'll land somewhere with better drinks, or any drinks," Kelder added, slumping into a seat with an exasperated sigh. "I'm starting to think the universe has it out for us personally." "Universe has it out for everyone," Rylus said, though his mind kept drifting back to the alien outpost and the data they'd stolen at great risk. "We're just more stubborn about it. What's the plan, Captain?" Xenia asked, her voice carrying a rare note of seriousness that cut through the usual banter. Rylus hesitated, the weight of leadership pressing down on him like a vice. "We need allies," he finally said. "I have a contact, an old friend, let's call him. And if anyone's crazy enough to help us take on an alien fleet, it's him." "Crazy enough is exactly what we need," Kelder grumbled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Because sane left the building ages ago. Crazy is our forte," Xenia quipped, though her smile was more genuine this time. "Lead the way, fearless leader." As they set course, Rylus couldn't shake the nagging doubt clawing at his insides. They were outgunned, outmanned, and out of ideas. But with the crew behind him, he felt a flicker of hope, a spark in the dark that refused to be snuffed out. The journey to the nearest outpost was anything but smooth. The Resolute rattled and wheezed like an asthmatic dinosaur, its systems protesting their continued existence with every kilometer. Any minute now, Kelder muttered darkly, his hands steady on the controls despite the ship's best efforts to dislodge him. We're overdue for a spectacular failure. Overdue for a spectacular something, Rylus replied, staring out at the endless expanse of space. But we're not going down without a fight. And plenty of sarcasm, Xenia added, stifling a groan as she shifted position. Can't forget that. Wouldn't dare, Rylus said, though the humor felt like a thin veneer over the gnawing anxiety underneath. The outpost loomed ahead, a rusted relic of better days, much like everything else in this corner of the galaxy. As they made their approach, Rylus couldn't help but wonder if he was leading them into a trap, if his contact would be there, if they'd even make it out alive. "Welcome to paradise," Kelder said as they docked, the ship shuddering like an old dog settling down for a nap, or whatever passes for it. "Let's hope my contact's feeling generous," Rylus said, heading for the airlock with Xenia and Kelder in tow. And not too trigger-happy. The outpost greeted them with the smell of stale air and desperation, the corridors echoing with distant noises that could have been laughter or screams. Rylus led the way, his mind a whirlwind of contingencies and worst-case scenarios. They found their contact nursing a drink in a dingy corner of the outpost's excuse for a bar. He looked up, a scarred face splitting into an uneven grin. "Rylus Gage, you old bastard," the man said, his voice as rough as gravel. "I thought you'd be dead by now." "Not for lack of trying," Rylus replied, taking a seat with the air of someone who might never get up again. "Need a favor, Jax." Jax raised an eyebrow, his gaze flicking to Xenia and Kelder. "And who are your charming companions?" Xenia Voss, sarcastic pilot extraordinaire, Xenia said with a mock salute. "Kelder Finn," Kelder added, holding out a hand. "Resident pessimist and mechanic." "Charmed," Jax said, though there was a glint of amusement in his eyes. "What brings you to this lovely corner of hell?" Rylus leaned forward, the urgency of their situation wiping away any vestiges of pleasantries. "We've got intel on an alien invasion." "The Vale's gonna be a war zone." Jax's expression sobered, the weight of Rylus's words sinking in. "And you want my help, you've got connections," Rylus said, his voice low and steady. "We need allies, anyone willing to fight." Jax considered this, his gaze thoughtful. "You're asking a lot, Rylus." "What's in it for me?" Rylus met his gaze, unflinching. "A chance to stick it to the interstellar bullies. And if that's not enough, I'll owe you." "Big time," Jax chuckled, though there was little humor in it. "You're a glutton for punishment, Gage. But I'll see what I can do." As Jax made to leave, Xenia leaned in, her curiosity piqued. "So how does a guy like you end up in a dump like this?" "Same way anyone does," Jax replied over his shoulder. "Bad decisions and a love of cheap booze. That's our brand," Kelder said with a wry grin. Rylus watched Jax disappear into the crowd, his mind already racing with possibilities. They had a glimmer of hope, a thread to pull, and for now, that would have to be enough. Back on the Resolute, the crew settled into a tense silence as they prepared for whatever came next. The weight of their mission hung over them like a storm cloud, heavy with the promise of violence and uncertainty. "Here's hoping Jax comes through," Xenia said, her tone lighter than her expression. "Otherwise, we've just wasted a perfectly good trip." "He'll come through," Rylus said, though he couldn't entirely banish the doubt gnawing at the edges of his mind. "He always does. If not, there's always duct tape and prayer," Kelder offered, his attempt at humor falling flat. "We do what we have to," Rylus said, though he wished he believed it more than he did. "And whatever happens, we face it together," Xenia echoed, her gaze steady and unwavering. The darkness loomed ahead, vast and unyielding, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Rylus dared to hope. The odds were against them, but they'd beaten the odds before. With a little luck and a whole lot of grit, they just might do it again. As the ship drifted through the void, a small, battered beacon of defiance, the crew prepared to meet whatever came next. They were ready to fight, to snarl into the face of oblivion and dare it to blink first. Because in the end, that was all they had, their courage, their camaraderie, and the unyielding conviction that if they went down, they'd go down swinging. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The Resolute's engines coughed like a lifelong smoker caught in a dust storm, a fitting soundtrack for the crew's last-ditch brainstorming session in the cargo bay. It wasn't much, but it was home, kind of like a seedy bar that you swear you'll never return to but somehow end up in every Friday night. Kelder stood at the center of it all, looking like a mechanic in a gritty noir flick, grease stains as much a part of his visage as his gravelly voice. He was hunched over the alien device, tinkering with the same intensity as a gambler betting his last chip. "Any luck making that thing work for us instead of against us?" Zynia asked, lounging against a crate with a datapad in her lap. Her sarcasm was as much for moral support as it was for entertainment. Kelder grunted, a sound that conveyed more than most people could in a paragraph. "Luck's a relative concept," he replied. "Right now, I'm hoping it's the kind of relative you only have to see at funerals." "Ah, the fond family reunion," Rylus said, arms crossed as he leaned against the wall. The burden of leadership sat heavy on his shoulders, but dark humor was the balm he applied liberally. "Speaking of which, any chance this gizmo can send our alien friends a one-way ticket to hell depends," Kelder said, his fingers deftly manipulating the innards of the device, "on whether you like your hell tickets with a side of catastrophic failure. I'm turning this thing inside out, trying to see if we can rig it to screw with their systems." Zynia peered over her datapad, her eyebrows arching in mild surprise. "And here I thought your only talents were fixing engines and killing hope." "Versatility's my middle name," Kelder shot back, not missing a beat. "But seriously, this device, it's got potential. The kind that says I might explode or save your sorry asses." Rylus tapped his foot, thinking. The crew faced a monumental task, and the alien fleet didn't plan to roll out the welcome mat. "So, best case," Kelder echoed, eyes on the shifting lights of the device as though it might suddenly reveal its secrets in Morse code. "We turn this thing into a countermeasure, something to scramble their systems and give us a fighting chance, and worst case?" Zynia asked because someone had to. Kelder looked up, his expression perfectly deadpan. "We blow ourselves up, but hey, at least we'll make a hell of a fireworks show." "Great," Rylus said, exhaling slowly. "I've always wanted to be remembered as interstellar confetti." "Could be worse," Zynia said. "We could end up as alien confetti. Way to look on the bright side," Rylus replied, his voice dripping with irony. "Let's say you pull off this miracle, Kelder. How do we use it?" Kelder leaned back, finally taking a moment to consider the bigger picture. "We need to get close to their command ship. Disable it, and the rest of the fleet should be easier to handle. Or at least less of a homicidal nightmare." "Less homicidal sounds good," Rylus agreed. "But getting in there isn't going to be a walk in the park, or a walk anywhere that doesn't involve getting shot at," Zynia added. "Yeah, that's going to be the tricky part," Kelder said. "But if I can rig this thing right, it'll mess with their sensors. Give us a ghost act long enough to get in, do the job, and get out." Rylus rubbed his chin, calculating risks like a man reading a particularly bleak fortune cookie. "We're talking a stealth run straight into the lion's den. Except the lions got lasers," Kelder said, fiddling with a circuit that looked suspiciously like it might bite back. Zynia sighed heavily, like Atlas with an extra planet to bear. "And here I thought we'd at least get a warm-up before diving straight into insanity." "Who needs a warm-up?" Rylus retorted, the gallows humor barely masking his own nerves. "We're professionals at winging it." "Professionals without a safety net," Kelder corrected, the sardonic twist of his mouth matching the glint in his eyes. "Nothing says confidence like no backup plan," Zynia quipped, though her smile was genuine enough to lift their spirits if only by millimeters. The ship's lights flickered, casting shadows that danced across the cargo bay like deranged specters. It was a reminder of their precarious situation, not that anyone needed reminding. "We've got one shot at this," Rylus said, the words heavy as neutron stars. "If we pull it off, we might just live to be jaded old bastards. If not," Zynia finished the thought with a humorless grin, "then it's been a hell of a ride." Kelder stood, the alien device cradled in his arms like a volatile newborn. "I'll get to work. See if I can't make this thing play nice with our systems." "You do that," Rylus said. "And we'll start planning how to break into an alien command ship without getting atomized." "Piece of cake," Zynia said, her voice light but her gaze deadly serious. As they dispersed, the weight of their upcoming mission settled on their shoulders like a shroud made of razor wire. The stakes were high, the odds stacked against them, but that was life in the void, unforgiving, relentless, and utterly indifferent to human ambition. In the engineering bay, Kelder set the alien device on a workbench, the hum of its circuits like a lullaby for madmen. He worked methodically, each movement measured, as if one slip might unravel the universe, or at least their shot at survival. "What do you think, old girl?" he muttered, addressing the Resolute's walls as if the ship itself might offer guidance. "You've kept us alive this far. Fancy helping me pull off a miracle." The ship creaked in response, as if acknowledging his plea. Maybe it would hold together one last time, if only out of spite. In the bridge, Rylus and Zynia mapped out their approach to the alien fleet, the holoscreen displaying a dance of light and data that would have been beautiful if it weren't potentially lethal. "I know I've said this before," Zynia began, her finger tracing a path through the holographic representation of their target, "but remind me why we're doing this again." Rylus shrugged, a slight, tired gesture. "Because the universe isn't going to save itself and somebody's got to play the hero." "Heroes overrated," Zynia said. "I'd settle for not dead, you and me both," Rylus admitted, "but we've got a chance. And maybe that's enough." "Hell of a gamble," she pointed out. "Best kind," Rylus said, managing a lopsided grin. "Win or lose, at least we'll know we tried." Zynia nodded, her respect for him deepening. It wasn't bravery she admired. It was the stubborn audacity to face the impossible with a middle finger raised. Hours passed in a blur of preparation and barely contained chaos. Kelder emerged at one point, brandishing the modified device like a triumphant warrior with a newly forged sword. "Well?" Rylus asked, his gaze flicking from the device to Kelder and back. "Can it do what we need?" Kelder nodded, the satisfaction in his eyes unmistakable. "It'll scramble their sensors and give us a window. Once it's active, we'll be ghosts in the machine." "Great," Zynia said, but her enthusiasm was more subdued. "So all we have to do now is not die." "Easier said than done," Rylus said, but there was a spark of hope in his words. "Let's get to it." The crew gathered in the bridge, the weight of what lay ahead palpable in the recycled air. Rylus took a moment to meet each of their eyes, drawing strength from the shared resolve and the unspoken camaraderie that bound them. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "We've got a plan. We've got an edge. Now we just need the guts to see it through." "Guts we've got," Kelder said, his fingers dancing over the controls to integrate the device with the ship systems. "And the gall to use them," Zynia added, taking her place at the pilot's seat with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Rylus settled into his own chair, the familiar creaks and groans of the old vessel like a strange comfort. "Engage the device," he ordered. Kelder did as told, the alien tech coming to life with a soft whirring that seemed almost eager. "We're live," he confirmed. "Then let's give him hell," Rylus said, the reckless determination in his voice resonating with the other two. The Resolute moved forward, a solitary speck against the backdrop of stars, heading towards the heart of an enemy that vastly outnumbered them. But they had something more important than numbers. They had each other, and a refusal to go quietly into any night, no matter how dark. As they approached the alien fleet, the device did its work, cloaking the ship in a veil of deception that even the most advanced alien tech couldn't penetrate. It was a feeling both exhilarating and terrifying, like walking a tightrope over an abyss. "Here we go," Zynia said, her hands steady on the controls as they slipped past the outer defenses, the alien ships oblivious to their presence. "Stay sharp," Rylus cautioned, eyes fixed on the looming command ship. "This is where it gets hairy." "It's been hairy for a while," Kelder muttered, but there was no mistaking the tension in his voice. They were in, deeper than any sane being would dare, and the sense of impending doom was as heavy as a neutron star. But the crew of the Resolute wasn't known for backing down, not when the stakes were this high and the odds so deliciously terrible. "Target the command ship's control center," Rylus instructed, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "And let's see if we can make these bastards blink first." Under Zynia's expert guidance, the Resolute maneuvered with surprising grace, an aging predator stalking its prey. The alien command ship loomed, a fortress of cold efficiency, its defenses unaware of the danger lurking in their midst. "Got a lock," Zynia reported, her voice a mix of excitement and fear. "Then let's knock," Rylus said, giving the command that would unleash their cobbled-together counterattack. The ship shuddered as their makeshift weapon fired, a pulse of energy directed at the heart of the enemy's command structure. For a moment, time seemed to hang suspended, the outcome uncertain. Then, with the inevitability of a sledgehammer meeting glass, the command ship systems flickered, the alien formation faltering as confusion spread through their ranks. "Did it work?" Kelder asked, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Looks like it," Zynia said, grinning despite the tension. "We've got a window. Let's use it." Rylus nodded, an unexpected wave of relief washing over him. They'd done it, pulled off the impossible with a broken-down ship and a ragtag crew. But the fight wasn't over yet. "All right, let's get the hell out of here," he said, the urgency in his voice cutting through their moment of triumph. Before they figure out what hit him, as the Resolute turned to make its escape, the reality of their situation hit them anew. They'd taken a step, shifted the balance, but victory was still a distant, uncertain goal. "Here's hoping we're still on their sensor's blind side," Zynia quipped, the tension easing as they left the battlefield behind. "Or that they are too busy chasing their tails to notice us," Kelder added, his voice a low rumble of satisfaction. Rylus allowed himself a rare moment of optimism. They'd lived to fight another day, defied the odds, and sent a message to the universe that they wouldn't go quietly. As the Resolute slipped back into the vastness of space, a sense of hope kindled in Rylus's chest, a flicker of defiance that refused to be snuffed out. Because if there was one thing they'd proven, it was that the human spirit was as unyielding as it was reckless, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The Resolute's engines groaned like a dying beast, a noise that screamed barely operational as the battered ship hurtled through the void. The crew held on, each member knowing full well that their trusty bucket of bolts was one loose screw away from becoming their coffin. "We're really doing this, huh?" Zynia asked, her eyes fixed on the flickering holoscreen, now displaying a chaotic mess of alien ships and bright beams of death. Charging straight into hell with all the grace of a drunk gambler at closing time, Rylus shrugged, a gesture that somehow conveyed both resignation and defiance. "Yup. Because why not make this suicide mission interesting?" "Interesting's one word for it," Kelder chimed in, his voice gravelly as usual. "Personally, I'd go with insane, or stupid," Zynia added, her fingers dancing over the controls with purpose despite her casual tone. Rylus smirked. "Why choose? We can be both. We're versatile like that." The alien command ship loomed larger on the screen, its cold steel exterior promising nothing but pain and annihilation. The technological marvel was an impregnable fortress, a leviathan of alien ingenuity. But if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was being a royal pain in the universe's ass. "Remember," Rylus said, his voice firm despite the gallows humor threading through, "we're not here to win a war. just to make the aliens regret inviting us to this little shindig and blow stuff up, Kelder added, unable to suppress the glee in his voice. Can't forget that, right? Maximum regret, maximum explosions. Zynia grinned, her nervous energy translating into an unsettling but somehow reassuring confidence. The human dream. As the Resolute neared the heart of the alien fleet, the modified device Kelder had rigged continued its magic, keeping them masked from the prying eyes of the enemy sensors. It was, however, a precarious advantage, one that could vanish with the slightest misstep or power surge. Zynia, how are we looking? Rylus asked, hoping for good news but prepared for the usual brand of cosmic misfortune. We're still ghosts, Captain, but this whole maneuver is one crossed wire away from a light show none of us want to see. Great. So, business as usual. Rylus leaned back, trying to project confidence as he gazed at the alien Goliath before them. Let's do this. The Resolute danced through the midst of the enemy fleet, Zynia's piloting skills nothing short of miraculous or suicidal, depending on one's perspective. Alien ships zipped past, oblivious to the human wasp buzzing in their midst, its sting poised to deliver ruin. Approaching the command ship's RC hole, Zynia announced with a smirk. Figuratively speaking, Kelder let out a bark of laughter, a harsh sound that cut through the tension. Never thought I'd be excited to see something so ugly. Rylus shook his head, unable to hide his grin. Let's give him a taste of human hospitality. As they reached the command ship, the Resolute released its payload, an electronic barrage aimed squarely at the alien systems. The plan was simple: hit them where it hurts and cause enough chaos to make a hasty retreat not only possible but likely. The alien ship shivered, lights flickering as the attack took hold. For a moment everything seemed to pause, the universe holding its breath. Then it happened. A ripple of confusion spread through the alien ships, their formation faltering as the technological gods of war were temporarily blinded by the human trickery. Did we just make them blink? Zynia asked, a hint of disbelief in her voice. Kelder, busy monitoring the readouts, nodded. Looks like it. Time to exit stage left. Let's not stick around for the encore, Rylus agreed. Zynia, get us out of here. With the precision of a surgeon and the recklessness of a maniac, Zynia guided the Resolute away from the chaos they had sown. Their ship, a junkyard of metal and dreams, moved with grace only born of necessity and sheer human stubbornness. As they raced away, the alien fleet behind them scrambled in disarray, their leaders struggling to regain control. The Resolute had done the impossible, struck a blow and lived to tell the tale, at least for now. Nice flying back there, Rylus said as the tension in the air began to dissipate, though the adrenaline still coursed through their veins like liquid fire. Thanks, Captain. Remind me to never do it again. You won't have to, Kelder chimed in, glancing at the monitors. Next time, someone else can volunteer to almost die in spectacular fashion. Let's just make sure there's no next time, Rylus said, the weight of their survival beginning to settle upon him as the stars whisked by outside. We've poked the hive. Now let's see if we can get clear before they realize who did it. The ship hummed with life, a battered beast that had once again defied the odds. Rylus allowed himself a moment of reflection, his mind a whirl of exhaustion and victory. They hadn't won the war, not by a long shot, but this was a battle they could chalk up to human ingenuity, a testament to the fact that sometimes being a little bit insane was just what the universe needed. As the Resolute pushed into safer territory, the crew shared a moment of silence, each of them absorbing the reality of what they'd just achieved. They were a band of misfits, armed with nothing but wits, sarcasm, and a ship that should have been grounded years ago. Yet here they were, alive and for the first time in a long time hopeful. All right, Rylus said finally, his voice cutting through the silence. I think we've earned ourselves a drink. Or 10. Kelder chuckled, the sound rich with relief. I'll drink to that. And to us not being dead. Yeah, being alive deserves a toast, Zynia agreed, her fingers easing off the controls as the immediate danger faded behind them. Even if it's just for another day. With the alien fleet reeling from their improvised assault, the Resolute made its way back into familiar space. It was far from a safe haven, but compared to where they'd been, it felt like paradise. As they coasted into the stars, Rylus allowed himself a small smile. Sure, they were outnumbered, outgunned, and generally outmatched. But they were human, and if there was one thing humans were good at, it was defying expectations and flipping the cosmic bird to anyone who said otherwise. The crew of the Resolute had written their own kind of legend, a tale of grit, madness, and the undeniable refusal to go quietly into any night, whether starless or not. And as the ship powered forward, leaving the chaos behind, they knew the story was far from over. "Let's not get too comfortable," Rylus said, breaking the contemplative silence. "We've still got a universe to save." Kelder shook his head, his voice a low rumble of irony. "And here I was hoping for a quiet retirement." Zynia's laughter filled the bridge, a sound full of life and resilience. "Retirement's for quitters. And we're too stubborn to quit now." With the Resolute racing through the void, the crew settled into a familiar rhythm, their hearts lighter than they'd been in weeks. They'd faced death and walked away, leaving a mess of confusion behind for their enemies to clean up. In that moment, amidst the stars and the infinite darkness, they knew they'd made a difference. The universe was still vast, still dangerous, and still incredibly indifferent. But they were human, and that meant something powerful and undeniable. As the Resolute soared onward, a shared sense of camaraderie and determination settled over the crew. They'd beaten the odds once more, and though there would be plenty more challenges to come, they were ready. Because if there was one thing the universe could count on, it was that humans had a knack for surviving against all logic and reason. And maybe, in the grand scheme of things, that was the most beautiful chaos of all. With the alien threat temporarily neutralized and their ship still miraculously in one piece, the crew of the Resolute found themselves in that rarest of moments, one where no immediate catastrophe loomed. Which, of course, made them all immediately suspicious. The noise of the engines, which usually felt like a countdown to their collective doom, now seemed unnervingly placid, a lullaby sung by a drunk uncle who'd somehow managed to hit a note of tenderness. If you ignored the occasional cough of metal fatigue, that is. Rylus leaned back in his chair, an action that felt like a challenge to the universe. Well, that was fun. "Who's up for round two, can we not?" Zynia replied from behind the pilot's console, her eyes still glued to the holoscreen. "I'd like to survive until at least lunchtime." Kelder, busy trying to coax some cooperation out of the engine readouts, grunted. "Lunch on this ship. That's what'll kill us." They'd been flying through the veil for what felt like a century, a place where navigation was more of an art than a science. And if art was anything like the mess Kelder had made in the engine room, it was no wonder the universe was constantly trying to off them. Zynia propped the datapad against her knee, her fingers tapping out a rhythm only she could hear. "We really showed those aliens, huh? Blind them with science, sneak attack, and run like hell. Classic. If by showed them you mean made them want us dead even more, then yeah," Rylus quipped, rubbing his temples. "Can't wait to see how big a bounty they'll slap on our heads now. Bet I'm worth at least half the ship," Kelder chuckled, running a hand through hair that looked more like steel wool than human follicles. "Good luck cashing that in. This ship's worth about as much as a chocolate teapot. Pity I was hoping to trade you for a decent meal." Zynia shot back, flashing a grin that could melt steel if the steel was already preheated and willing. Rylus let their banter wash over him, the familiar rhythm of insult and camaraderie soothing in its own way. They'd survived, after all. And in this part of the galaxy, that was saying something. As the Resolute made its way deeper into the veil's tangled webs of space and time, thoughts drifted to the ordeal they'd just endured. It was almost like reminiscing about a particularly bad hangover, except this one came with deadly consequences, and nobody could remember what the hell they'd drunk to deserve it. Rylus spent a good portion of his time reflecting on their somewhat miraculous victory and how close they'd come to becoming cosmic roadkill. How the hell did we pull that off? He mused aloud, half expecting the ship to answer. Blind luck and sheer stupidity, Zynia replied without missing a beat. Also known as our standard operating procedure. I prefer to call it creative problem solving, Kelder said, sounding like a man who'd solved a lot of problems by hitting them with a wrench. Gives it a certain prestige. Prestige is what gets you medals, Rylus countered. We're more likely to get wanted posters, with the alien threat temporarily licking its wounds, or whatever it was aliens did when they were thwarted. The crew turned their attention to their next marathon of headaches. The Veil. It was a cosmic anomaly, a swirling soup of spacetime where physics went to take a holiday and only returned with a sunburn and a questionable tattoo. The Veil had always been a dangerous route, one used only when there was no other option. But it was also a testament to human stubbornness, an unpredictable mess that had yet to claim the Resolute, much to the ongoing dismay of the universe's risk assessors. I suppose it's time to start rebuilding the Veil, Rylus said, not without a touch of irony. Fixing something they didn't really understand was par for the course after all. Zynia raised an eyebrow. Rebuilding the Veil? Didn't know we were into home improvement, more like intergalactic renovation, Kelder grumbled. One bungled patch job at a time. The Resolute's modifications were designed to help them navigate this chaos, and with Kelder's habit of jerry-rigging things just short of exploding, it was a wonder they'd gotten as far as they had. The device he'd rigged, still humming with alien energy, sat like a benign monster, its potential both terrifying and tantalizing. As they started the process of stabilizing the Veil, whatever that entailed, the crew's mood shifted from victorious to contemplative. It was a hard-earned realization that surviving wasn't just about luck or skill, but refusing to bow to the inevitable darkness of space. The universe really doesn't like us, Zynia commented, staring out into the depths of the Veil. Feels personal at this point. Don't take it too hard, Rylus said. It hates everyone equally. We just like to poke it more often. Some people are gluttons for punishment, Kelder added. And we happen to be their leaders. The Resolute moved through the Veil, the ship's patched hull groaning in protest as if aware of the insanity of their task. But what was space travel without a bit of existential dread? As they worked, the crew found comfort in their banter and shared history. They were bonded by more than just survival. They were united by a determination to prove their existence mattered, even to a universe that couldn't care less. Rylus watched the crew with a sense of pride. Misfits, every one of them, but they were his misfits. You think we'll ever get to retire? He asked, mostly as a joke. Retire? Zynia laughed, the sound a bright burst against the backdrop of their grim journey. From what? Being cosmic nuisances. Besides, Kelder added, I wouldn't know what to do with myself if I wasn't risking my neck on a daily basis. Right, Rylus said, because peace and quiet are overrated. The Resolute trudged forward, each hum of its engines a defiance against the cosmos. They were still far from victory, but they'd bought themselves another day. A day to regroup, repair, and maybe even enjoy a moment of peace. As they continued their mission of stabilizing the Veil, the crew's thoughts turned to the future. They knew the aliens wouldn't take their little stunt lying down, and the next encounter would be even more perilous. But for now, they had something they hadn't had in a long time: hope. Hope, like the rest of them, was a stubborn thing. It didn't die easily, surviving on scraps and sheer willpower. In their darkest hours, it was the thread that kept them tethered to the belief that maybe, just maybe, they could make a difference. Think we'll get a holiday after this? Zynia asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't holding her breath. A holiday, Rylus mused. Now that sounds terrifying. What would we do with all that spare time? Probably get into more trouble, Kelder said. We're good at that. The Veil loomed around them, a testament to human tenacity and folly. It was a reminder that no matter how many times they were knocked down, they'd get back up, a little more bruised each time but no less determined. As the crew worked, they found themselves reflecting on their journey and the cost of their survival. They'd lost friends along the way, and each victory was tinged with the bitterness of those who hadn't made it. But they carried their memories with them, a silent promise to keep fighting, to keep defying the odds. "Here's to us," Rylus said, raising an imaginary glass to his crew. "The universe's best and brightest disasters. To us," Xenia and Kelder echoed, their smiles weary but genuine. As the veil began to stabilize, the crew allowed themselves a rare moment of triumph. They'd survived another day, another battle, and lived to fight some more. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Rylus knew their challenges were far from over. The universe was still vast, still unforgiving. But they were human, and that meant something. They were stubborn, irreverent, and unyielding in the face of adversity. And as long as they drew breath, they'd keep fighting. The Resolute pushed onward, a battered beacon of hope in a galaxy that so desperately needed it. They were misfits and outcasts, but they were also a force to be reckoned with. And that was the beauty of it all, the ultimate chaotic punchline to the universe's cosmic joke. "Let's keep moving," Rylus said, his voice steady against the backdrop of their uncertain future. "There's a whole universe out there waiting to be annoyed by us." Kelder grinned, his voice a gravelly whisper of confidence. "Bring it on." The Resolute continued its journey through the stars, a testament to human resilience and defiance. They were the unlikely heroes of their own story, and as long as they could breathe, they'd keep writing the chapters, because in the end they were human, and that was enough. It had to be.